The words landed between them like a match striking dry air. For a heartbeat, Sang-hyeon didn't move. His chest rose and fell hard, sweat tracing the hard lines of his body, his fists still clenched as if the bag were standing right in front of him. Then he laughed. It was short, sharp, humorless. "You don't know when to stop," he said quietly. Zola tilted her head, unafraid. "Neither do you. You just hide it better." She was close enough now that he could feel the heat of her skin, smell the faint citrus beneath her clean, sharp athletic scent. His gaze dropped, against his will, to the line of her waist, the steady flex of muscle as she shifted her weight. That was the mistake. He reached out, not rough, but fast, gripping her wrist and pulling her just far enough that she stumbled into him. Her palms hit his chest instinctively, fingers splaying against slick skin. The contact was devastating. They both froze. This wasn't the accidental brushing in hallways. This wasn't tension across a room. This was undeniable. "You want me to lose control," he said, voice low, dangerous, honest in a way he'd avoided for months. "Because if I do, you don't have to feel alone in wanting this." Her breath stuttered, but she didn't pull away. "I've felt alone the entire time," she said softly. "You were standing right there, Sang-hyeon, and you still left me by myself." His grip tightened, not in anger, but restraint. "You think I stayed away because I didn't want you?" His jaw flexed. "I stayed away because wanting you is a weakness I cannot afford." "Then you chose the wrong woman," Zola said. "Because I refused to be loved like a liability." She lifted her chin, daring him again, not with sass this time, but with truth. Something in him finally gave. Not completely, but enough. His hand slid from her wrist to her waist, anchoring her there, his thumb pressing lightly as if to remind himself she was real. His forehead dropped to hers, sweat mingling, breaths tangled. "If I cross this line," he murmured, "I won't be able to go back." "Good," she whispered. "I don't want the man who hides behind walls." For a second, just one, he hovered there, torn between instinct and discipline. Then he kissed her. Not gentle, not rough, controlled, restrained, like a man testing fire with bare hands. Zola inhaled sharply against his mouth, her fingers curling into his shoulders, and the sound she made, soft, surprised, relieved, went straight through him. He pulled back just as quickly, breath ragged, eyes dark. "Go," he said, voice shaking now. "If you stay another minute, I won't stop." Zola searched his face, saw the truth he could no longer bury. A slow smile curved her lips, not triumphant this time, but warm. "Tomorrow, then," she said quietly. She stepped back, deliberately, giving him the space he'd asked for, but no longer truly wanted. As she walked out of the gym, Sang-hyeon stood there, hands braced on his thighs, heart pounding like he'd just survived a fight he hadn't trained for. For the first time in years, discipline hadn't won. It had merely delayed the inevitable. And both of them knew it. Sang-hyeon stayed in the gym long after Zola had left, the faint echo of her footsteps still in his ears. The heavy bag swung gently from its chain, a ghost of his earlier blows. He didn't move to touch it again. The sweat on his skin had cooled, leaving him trembling, not from exertion, but from her. From the audacity of her. From the fact that she had forced the walls he built over decades to crumble with nothing but a look, a word, a smirk. He wanted to call her back, to pull her into his arms and make her understand that she wasn't just wanted, she was needed. That she wasn't merely a disruption. She was the only thing that made the discipline and isolation worth it. But he didn't. He couldn't. Pride was still a thing he wore like armor, even if it was cracked and dented in places she had found. The rest of the night passed in a haze of unfinished work. His lieutenants had cleared out early, wary of staying too long around a man whose gaze could cut through steel. Sang-hyeon barely noticed the reports on his desk. His mind was consumed with the image of her. The curve of her hips in that black athletic set, the defiance in her eyes, the slow, deliberate way she moved as if daring him to act. By midnight, he found himself standing at the balcony, the neon veins of Seoul sprawling beneath him like a city breathing in fluorescent light. The wind cut through the penthouse, but it did nothing to cool the fire burning in his chest. He closed his eyes, imagining her there with him, just a few steps away. A fantasy so vivid it hurt. Then he heard it. A soft laugh, barely a whisper carried by the wind. "Still awake, Sang-hyeon?" He froze, instinctively scanning the room. The faint silhouette of her top, not against the moonlight, confirmed it. She had crept onto the balcony, drawn by the same restless energy that had consumed him hours ago. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, voice low, tense, impossibly controlled. And you shouldn't be thinking about me like that, she teased, stepping closer. The faint scent of jasmine and spice wrapped around him. Her bare feet made no sound on the marble, but every step reverberated in his chest. He turned to face her fully, muscles coiled. You're dangerous. Her smile deepened. You love danger. Don't lie to me, Sang. You've been pretending all day that you're indifferent, but your hands were shaking when I left the gym. You're a man who hates losing control, and you lost it. The admission was electric. He wanted to deny it, wanted to say she misread him, but he couldn't. She had seen him. She had pierced the carefully constructed ice around his heart, and now there was no pretending. Then why are you still standing there? She asked, her voice a mix of challenge and invitation. Sang-hyeon stepped closer, the gap closing until there was barely an inch between them. He could feel her warmth, smell the faint musk of her exertion. His fingers twitched, aching to reach for her, to claim what she had already taken. Because, he said, voice rough, once I act, there's no stopping me. Her eyes sparkled in the moonlight. Then act. It was all the permission he needed. The kiss this time was nothing like before. There was no hesitation, no restraint. It was urgent claiming, a collision of months of longing, frustration, and desire. Her hands threaded into his hair, pulling him closer, and for the first time in his life, Sang-hyeon didn't care about appearances, about control, about consequences. The city below continued to pulse with life, oblivious to the quiet war and surrender unfolding above it in the Sang mansion. And in that suspended moment, two people who had fought each other and themselves for 6 months finally understood one simple truth. They were unstoppable together. But even in the fire of the kiss, both knew the danger hadn't passed. The underworld of Seoul never slept. Alliances would be tested. Enemies would watch. And the stakes were higher than either of them could afford. Yet neither cared. Not tonight. Tonight, Zola had won the war of hearts. And Sang-hyeon, proud, untouchable, merciless Sang-hyeon, was blissfully, irrevocably, deliciously defeated. The first light of dawn cut through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sang mansion, spilling pale gold over the obsidian marble floors. Sang-hyeon sat at the head of the breakfast table, the papers and digital screens from the night before still glowing faintly in the dim light. His suit jacket lay discarded over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled up to reveal the long, coiled muscles of his forearms. His knuckles were still faintly raw from the gym session, a subtle reminder of his morning's restraint, or lack thereof. He hadn't slept much. His thoughts, relentless and chaotic, replayed the gym. The balcony. Her laugh. The taste of her lips, the heat of her body pressed against his. The way she had pulled him into her orbit so completely that the carefully constructed world he had built around himself felt like a paper tower threatening to collapse. The clatter of dishes in the kitchen pulled him from the reverie. Zola emerged, still in her athletic gear, damp hair pulled into a messy top knot, a faint sheen of sweat highlighting her dark, radiant skin. She moved through the kitchen like she owned it, which, in reality, she did. Her presence had turned the house into something unpredictable, dangerous, intoxicating. "Morning," she said, voice casual, eyes glittering with mischief. She poured herself coffee and leaned against the counter, hip cocked, legs crossed in a way that made him lose focus entirely. He didn't look at her. He wouldn't. Not yet. "Morning," he muttered, voice rough. His fingers drummed against the edge of the table, tight, restless. "You're avoiding me," she observed, smirk tugging at her lips. "I am not," he said, voice clipped. He did not raise his gaze. "Right," she said, taking a slow sip of her coffee. "Because a man who almost threw another man through a gala ballroom window 6 hours ago totally isn't thinking about me while pretending not to." The sound of her words was deliberate, teasing, yet beneath it was the same steel that had always cut through him. Her insight, her fearless defiance. It wasn't just infuriating, it was magnetic. He wanted to scold her. He wanted to command her. He wanted to crush her against him and tell her she wasn't allowed to tease him like this. But that was the problem. She had taken all the control without asking, and he couldn't fight it. "You're impossible," he muttered, finally lifting his gaze to hers. Dark eyes, stormy and unyielding, met hers across the room. "Am I?" Her smirk widened, and she stepped closer, the gap between them closing just enough to make the air between them thrum. "Or are you just realizing what 6 months of boredom looks like when the only distraction that matters finally stops being polite?" Sang-hyeon's jaw tightened. He swallowed hard, the taste of coffee suddenly metallic in his mouth. His hands itched to grab her, to remind her, and himself, who she belonged to, but there were cameras, staff, and lieutenants to consider. His pride would not allow a scene here. Not yet. Breakfast, he said finally, voice a low growl. Eat. Then go. Before I lose my temper. She laughed, a sound like silk tearing, and leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. You say that like you could stop yourself. And in that moment, he realized she was right. He couldn't. Hours later, the household hummed with routine, yet every movement, every glance, every subtle shift carried tension. Zola had turned the day into a minefield of distractions. Leaning casually over documents on his desk, brushing past him as she delivered messages to staff, laughing softly at jokes no one else could hear. Sang-hyeon's restraint was tested every second. Every subtle brush against his skin a reminder of the fire he refused to fully admit to himself. By evening, the penthouse was quiet again. The city lights of Seoul flickered through the windows. Sang-hyeon sat in his study, whiskey untouched. Zola appeared silently behind him, perched lightly on the edge of the desk, legs swinging lazily. She reached out, trailing a finger along the veins in his forearm. 6 months, she murmured. And you've spent every day pretending I didn't exist. His jaw clenched. He didn't answer. I wonder, she said, leaning closer, how much longer you can pretend before you break completely. He didn't move, but his eyes betrayed him. Dark, smoldering, unguarded. You'll be the death of me, Zola, he finally said, voice low, strained, almost a confession. And you'll be the death of me, she replied softly, fingers brushing the nape of his neck. But tonight, maybe we don't die. Maybe we just burn. Sang-hyeon's hand twitched, yearning to reach for her, to close the distance he had left open, to claim the fire she offered. But he stayed still, forcing the control that had kept him alive for decades, even as his heart and every fiber of him screamed to abandon it all. She smiled, sensing the inner battle, and leaned back, the subtle sway of her hips a silent challenge. Tomorrow she would push again. And Sang-hyeon, proud, disciplined, untouchable Sang-hyeon, knew he would not survive it without losing everything he had spent his life building. Yet for the first time, he didn't care. Because Zola had already won. The night came heavy and still over Seoul, the city lights glittering like distant stars beneath the Sang mansion. Inside, the house seemed almost alive, holding its breath in anticipation of what it knew was coming. Sang-hyeon's study was dark except for the soft glow of his desk lamp, papers scattered like battle plans that no longer mattered. He sat, fingers steepled, jaw tight, staring at nothing. Every sound in the mansion, the creak of the floors, the distant hum of traffic, pulled his attention toward one presence he couldn't ignore. A soft knock came at the door. He didn't answer. It came again, slightly louder. I know you're awake, Zola's voice whispered, teasing but laced with that fire he could never resist. Open the door, or I'll find my own way in. Sang-hyeon didn't move. He told himself she was testing him, testing his control, testing the rules he'd set for her, and for himself. Another step, another sigh. Then she was there, bare feet on the marble, hips swaying with purpose, the faint scent of her perfume drifting into the room. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a shadow of moonlight framing her. You can't hide from me, she murmured. He finally looked at her, and something inside him broke. Not completely, but enough. You shouldn't be here, he said, voice low, rasping. And you shouldn't be pretending all day that I don't exist, she shot back, stepping fully into the room now, close enough for the heat of her to scorch him. He rose, towering, his shadow engulfing her. His hands clenched at his sides, every fiber of him taut with the desire he had denied for months. Zola, he said, each syllable like a warning. You do not understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted, tilting her head, a sly smile curving her lips. I understand that you've spent 6 months trying not to want me. And I also understand that you've failed. The words were a strike, a challenge, a confession he wasn't ready to give, but could no longer hide from. Sang-hyeon's hands moved before his mind could stop them, one hand gripping her waist, the other brushing her hair back from her face. The contact was deliberate, claiming, impossibly intimate. Zola didn't flinch. She leaned into him, teasing, daring, intoxicating. You are impossible, he growled, lips grazing the curve of her neck. And you love it, she whispered back, fingers tangling in the front of his shirt, pulling him impossibly closer. Don't lie to me, Sang-hyeon. You want this just as much as I do. He groaned low in his throat, eyes dark, stormy, full of the hunger he had denied. If I give in, if I touch you, there's no going back, he said, voice rough, ragged, vulnerable in a way he never allowed anyone to see. I don't want back, she breathed, lips brushing his jaw. I want forward. I want all of it. Right now. And with that, the last of the walls he had built over years, the control, the pride, the careful detachment, crumbled. Sang-hyeon kissed her. Not gently. Not tenderly. Not measured. It was fire and friction, months of suppressed need erupting in a single, violent claim. Zola moaned softly against him, arching into the press of his body, her hands roaming freely, fearless. He pulled back just enough to see her, to drink in the sight of her eyes dark with desire, lips swollen from the kiss, chest rising and falling against him. The sight made his control shatter further, made his restraint laughably futile. "You're mine," he rasped, voice low, vibrating with something dangerous. "No one touches you. No one looks at you. No one dares to." "Then show me," she whispered, cutting him off, daring him, laughing softly into the tension that had bound them for months. Sang-hyeon's hands tightened at her waist, dragging her closer, pressing the undeniable truth of their connection into the air around them. Tonight there were no rules. There were no lies. There was only fire, hunger, and the intoxicating danger of two people finally surrendering to what had been inevitable all along. And the city of Seoul, oblivious below, had no idea the storm that raged above. The mansion was quiet except for the soft hum of the city outside, the faint thrum of neon bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sang-hyeon's study had become a battlefield, not of violence, but of restraint, control, and desire. Zola's presence hung heavy in the room, a tangible heat that made the air feel too thin, too close, too dangerous. She leaned back slightly against the desk, a smirk tugging at her lips. "So, this is the man who refuses to touch me for 6 months, she said, voice teasing, yet threaded with challenge. "And yet, when I walk into the same room, you're nothing but fire beneath your skin." Sang-hyeon didn't answer immediately. His eyes darkened, stormy, fixated on her every movement. Every inch of her radiated defiance, and every defiant step she had taken toward him over the past 6 months had carved away the walls he had built so carefully around his heart. "You've been reckless," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, but vibrating with something he could no longer suppress. "And you've been weak," she shot back, daring him, leaning just close enough for her warmth to radiate against him. "Weak enough to deny what you've wanted, what you've needed for 6 months. He moved before he thought, hand closing around her wrist, tugging her closer until their bodies were flush. Her gasp was soft, a small surrender, and it stoked the fire already raging in him. "You are dangerous," he said, voice tight, his forehead brushing hers. "You don't understand the kind of chaos you bring into my life. One touch, one word, and you lose control," she finished for him, her lips grazing the shell of his ear, teasing. "Exactly. Finally, we're being honest." He groaned low, frustration and longing warring in his chest. "Zola," he breathed, lips inches from hers, eyes dark with an intensity she had never seen before. "You will," she whispered, cutting him off, teasing fearless. Her hand trailed up the line of his chest, brushing over taut muscle, stopping just short of his neck. "Do it, Sang. Stop pretending you have control. Stop lying to yourself." The last of his restraint snapped. His hands moved with precision and need, dragging her fully into him, gripping her hips, pressing her against the desk. She met him halfway, arching, lifting onto her toes, fingers threading into the dark silk of his hair. The first kiss was explosive, hungry, desperate, claiming. Months of suppressed tension, of distance, of pretending, erupted in a storm that left them both gasping. Her lips were fire, her hands were a challenge, and for the first time in his life, Sang-hyeon didn't care who could see, who might hear, or what rules they were breaking. Zola laughed into the kiss, soft, triumphant, and the sound sent a shiver down his spine. "I've waited long enough," she murmured against his mouth. "Don't hold back." And he didn't. Hands roamed, lips claimed, and the penthouse became a crucible of heat and desire. Discipline was a distant memory. Pride was a luxury that no longer mattered. The only thing that existed was them, tangled, hungry, inevitable. Minutes stretched into an eternity, broken only by ragged breaths and whispered challenges. She pressed against him, daring him, teasing him, pushing every boundary he had set for himself. He matched her move for move, heat for heat, until every ounce of control he had spent decades cultivating melted in the fire of her touch. When they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, chests heaving, the room was silent except for the sound of their breaths. The city outside continued to pulse, indifferent. But inside, the Sang mansion was a world remade. Sang-hyeon looked into her eyes, dark, stormy, utterly captivated. You're impossible, he breathed, voice rough with desire and awe. And you're addicted, she replied, smirk tugging at her lips. Admit it, Sang-hyeon. You can't resist me. You never could. His jaw clenched, eyes dark, heart racing. He wanted to argue, to assert control, but the truth was undeniable. She had won. Not with force. Not with cunning. Not with power. She had won by being exactly who she was, bold, fearless, untamed. He pulled her closer, just enough to rest his forehead against hers again. Tomorrow, he said, voice low, vibrating with restrained hunger, we continue. And this time, you won't get away with teasing me so easily. Zola's laugh was soft, victorious, knowing. Good, she whispered. I wouldn't want it any other way. And somewhere deep inside, Sang-hyeon realized that for the first time, he didn't want the control back. He wanted her. All of her. And he would fight the world to have her. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the pale curtains of the Sang mansion, painting the obsidian floors in gold. Sang-hyeon's office was empty, the screens dark, the usual meticulous order disrupted in ways he hadn't yet admitted to anyone, least of all himself. His mind replayed last night on a loop. Zola's laugh, the press of her body, the audacity of her touch. Every detail, every nuance, stoked a fire he hadn't realized could burn hotter than his city-wide power plays. But there was work to be done. The docks weren't waiting. Enemies never slept. And yet, even with all the strategic reports and security alerts at his fingertips, Sang-hyeon's attention kept drifting toward her. He hadn't seen her yet that morning, but he could sense her. Her presence was always magnetic, always disruptive. And today she had a plan. It wasn't long before she made her entrance. She appeared in the hallway, dressed in a flowing silk blouse, the color of midnight, and tailored pants that hugged her hips just enough to make the lieutenants avert their gaze automatically. She moved like a shadow, silent but deliberate, each step a challenge. Sang-hyeon intercepted her in the main hall, hands in his pockets, posture rigid, jaw set. Zola, he said, tone low and warning. Do not disrupt the morning briefings. Do not. Do not what exactly? She interrupted, voice smooth, teasing. Do not remind me that I'm the nuisance you can't live without? He didn't answer immediately, instead studying her with the intensity of a predator measuring its prey. The smirk on her lips was infuriating, and yet irresistible. She leaned casually against the edge of the table, eyes sparkling, daring him. You've already lost, she murmured. You're just too proud to admit it. Sang-hyeon's fingers flexed. He wanted to grab her, to drag her into a corner, and remind her what it meant to challenge him. But there were cameras, staff, rules. Yet she had already broken them all simply by existing in his line of sight. You think this is a game? He asked, voice low, dangerous, lips twitching with the restraint he barely held. It is, she said, stepping closer, letting the faint scent of jasmine and spice fill his senses. But it's a game you've already lost, Sang-hyeon. The rules were mine all along. He advanced a step, the heat of his body radiating toward hers. If this continues, he said, voice rough, a dangerous rasp, I will no longer be able to pretend control exists. You know that. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly, as if weighing his threat. Then pretend no longer. I've been waiting months for you to stop hiding behind rules and pride. I want the real man. The one who burned through the gala. The one who couldn't look away when Malik dared touch me. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He wanted to argue, to tell her that it wasn't desire. It was control, duty, survival. But the truth was undeniable. She had seen him. All of him. And he had been powerless to resist. Tomorrow, he growled, stepping closer until she could feel the weight of his presence. We finish this. And then, there will be consequences. Zola smiled, a slow, victorious curve of her lips. Good. I don't do anything without stakes. The tension between them hung thick in the air, electric, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. Outside, the city of Seoul continued to pulse, unaware of the storm brewing in the heart of the Sang mansion. Inside, two people who had spent months denying the inevitable finally faced the truth. Neither could survive the other without surrendering completely. And neither was willing to stop. Night fell over the Sang mansion like a velvet curtain, soft yet suffocating. The city below shimmered with neon veins, unaware that in this penthouse, desire, pride, and danger collided like a perfect storm. Sang-hyeon sat in his private study, papers untouched, fingers drumming on the obsidian desk. The fire in his chest, stoked all day by the mere presence of Zola, had grown unbearable. Every sound, every shadow, Every faint laugh that drifted through the halls set his pulse racing. The door opened quietly. She didn't knock. She never knocked. Zola entered, dressed in a black silk jumpsuit that clung to her curves and left just enough to the imagination to make restraint a joke. She carried herself with ease, the faint sway of her hips a silent challenge. Her hair was down now, cascading in waves, the glow of the city reflecting off the glossy strands. "You still can't focus," she said softly, stepping toward him, voice low, teasing. "You're thinking about me again." He didn't answer. Instead, he rose from his chair, every inch of his frame taut, his jaw tight, his hands clenching into fists. The restraint that had kept him alive for decades was cracking. "Zola," he said, voice low, warning, dangerous, yet laced with that raw edge she craved. "You've crossed the line. This," his hand gestured vaguely toward the space between them. "This ends tonight. You don't understand the consequences of your actions." "I understand perfectly," she replied, stepping closer until her hand brushed his chest, feeling the rapid pulse beneath his skin. "The consequences of denying who we are, of pretending we can control this fire, are worse than anything you could imagine." He tried to maintain the armor of pride and discipline, but it was gone. Every word, every step she took, unraveled him further. He reached for her, hands gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. Her breath hitched, and the challenge in her eyes lit a flame he could no longer contain. "You are mine," he growled, his voice vibrating through the room, a dark promise, a threat, a confession all at once. "No one touches you. No one looks at you. No one dares to." "Then prove it," she whispered, lips dangerously close to his, voice soft but commanding. "Prove it with everything you've been holding back." And he did. Sang-hyeon's hands roamed with precision and intensity, claiming, mapping, igniting. Zola responded in kind, fearless, teasing, daring him, testing every ounce of his will. The room became a crucible of heat, desire, and power. The only sounds were ragged breaths, whispered challenges, and the soft echo of skin against silk and muscle. Minutes stretched into an eternity, every touch, every kiss, every sigh a declaration of war and surrender simultaneously. Pride and discipline were meaningless here. Only fire and the undeniable pull between them existed. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads pressed together, chests heaving, the air thick with tension and perfume, Sang-hyeon's eyes darkened, unreadable but utterly captivated. "You've broken me," he murmured, voice low, husky, a confession he had never allowed himself to give. "And you love it," Zola replied, smirk tugging at her lips. "Admit it, Sang-hyeon. You've wanted this from the moment you met me. You just didn't realize it until now." He didn't answer, because the truth was raw, undeniable, and utterly consuming. For the first time in his life, Sang-hyeon wasn't controlling anyone. He was being controlled by desire, by fire, by Zola. And he didn't want to stop. The mansion was silent save for the soft hum of the city below, but Sang-hyeon's mind was anything but. Every thought led back to her. The curve of her neck, the fire in her eyes, the way she had unspooled his control piece by piece over the past week. He couldn't focus on anything else. The reports, the underworld movements, even the docks, all of it blurred into irrelevance the moment Zola stepped into his presence. And tonight he knew she would test him again. He didn't have to wait long. The first click of her heels on the marble floor announced her arrival before she appeared. Zola was in black again, tight leather pants, a sheer blouse that hinted at curves he refused to name aloud. Her hair fell around her shoulders, wild and untamed. Her eyes, dark and gleaming with mischief, locked onto his. "Did you miss me?" she asked softly, stepping closer, each movement slow, deliberate. Sang-hyeon's jaw tightened. "You're reckless," he said, voice low, a growl. "You've spent 6 months pushing boundaries. You'll break something, or someone, if you continue. And yet," she said, brushing a finger over the back of his hand, "you're still here, watching me, waiting." Every word was a challenge, every touch a spark. He felt it all, the pull, the fire, the ache that had been growing inside him for months. He wanted to scold her, to command her, to make her stop, but he couldn't. "You're dangerous," he said, voice thick, a warning and a confession intertwined. "One more step, and I won't be responsible for my actions." Her smile widened. "Good," she whispered, leaning just close enough for her lips to brush his ear. "I don't want you to be responsible. I want you to want me. All of me." That was all it took. Sang-hyeon's restraint shattered completely. His hands closed around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Zola gasped, her fingers tangling in the front of his shirt, and the room became a storm of heat, desire, and unspoken tension. The kiss was explosive, raw, and consuming. Months of longing, frustration, and denial exploded in a single desperate claim. Zola pressed against him, fearless, teasing, and demanding. Sang-hyeon's hands roamed, claiming, testing, staking his claim in a way that left no room for doubt. And yet, amidst the fire and hunger, there was a game, a challenge, a dance of power neither of them could stop. Zola leaned back just enough to whisper in his ear. 6 months of pretending we're strangers. 6 months of distance. Tonight, we burn it all down. He groaned low, head tilting to capture her lips again, mind and body ablaze. If we do this, he murmured, voice raw, there's no going back. I never wanted to go back, she replied, smirk tugging at her lips. I want forward. I want every dangerous inch of you. And with that, they fell into each other again, the mansion a private world of fire, chaos, and desire. Outside, the city pulsed with its own rhythm, oblivious. But inside, Sang-hyeon and Zola were a storm that could not be contained. If you want, I can continue into the next.